Okay, we're ready for our next speaker. And she has a tough act to follow. I'm really sorry about that, but she's a great speaker. Her name is Dr. Shaku Nair, and I heard her at the Desert Horticultural Conference that is held out of Tucson each year. And what I was so impressed with is her broadness of the approach to IPM, or integrated pest management. I think that you will really enjoy this. Dr. Nair, if I can get this in the light, is an entomologist by passion and profession and a strong advocate of integrated pest management. Ooh, that smells good, like electricity. She has expertise using IPM in natural and structural environments. Her primary responsibilities include taking research on pest management and translating it for community education. She facilitates IPM implementation and adoption in different community environments, such as schools, housing, recreational areas, medical facilities, turf, and landscape. She currently serves as Associate in Extension, Community IPM at the Arizona Pest Management Center for the University of Arizona. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Nair. I couldn't find her. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello, yes. The next question is, can you all see me? I'm a little vertically challenged, so I was wondering if I should get up on the stage, but then all of these beautiful decorations on the stage might hide me, so I guess I'll just stand here, right? But thank you so much for the kind introduction. That was lovely, and I'm just so delighted to be here. This is my first time at the Think Trees, New Mexico. And this is a great venue. So thank you so much for having me. And as was stated, I'm an entomologist by passion and profession. That's what I like to say. I'm really crazy about insects. And once you hear me speak, you'll realize I'm a little partial to insects. But I deal with all kinds of pests, not just insects. And in this presentation, what I'm hoping to do is, of course, talk about integrated pest management, but also transfer some of my enthusiasm and appreciation for the diversity of all of these critters that we see in the landscape, our beautiful desert Southwest landscape, and share some tips on how to manage them, not kill all of them, right? Just live in harmony with them. And for some of you, this might be a refresher, I'm sure. But for new hands in the field, I hope you can gain some insights into the different types of pests that we see in the landscape. All right, so let's get started. I hope I'm doing the, okay, there. No, what did I do? Good, okay, I learned how to do that. Okay, so I often start any talk on pest management with a question: what is a pest? Right, and here is a pair of beautiful butterflies. Does anyone know what butterflies these are? They are very special butterflies. I have to tell you this. Anyone? No? Come on, please. This is the New Mexico State butterfly. All right, the Sandia hair streak. Aren't they gorgeous? Look at that green and gold. Absolutely gorgeous butterflies. And would we call them pests? Of course not, right? They're not pests. What about their caterpillars? So now everyone knows the New Mexico State butterfly, I hope. Don't forget. Okay, what about its caterpillar? Would anyone call it a pest? I wouldn't. They're beautiful. The green and the pattern on their backs, but, well, I wouldn't call them a pest, but as far as the plant is concerned on which they feed, it could be a pest, right? So that's what the point I was trying to make is the term pest is very variable. Varies with people, varies with the situation. However, that is what drives our actions with regards to pest management, right? It's what we think as a pest. Okay, so with that introduction to pest, let's move on. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they hear the term pest, they immediately think of an insect. But there are so many other pests out there, right? Rodents and other mammals, weeds, of course, pathogens, even people, right? People can be pests. Sure. Okay. So there's many other kinds of pests, and for our purpose in urban landscapes, I'll just designate 4 major categories. The first is weeds. And believe it or not, that's the number one, takes the number one spot. The most efforts are directed towards weed management. And they can appear in all sorts of unwanted places. You know, the basic definition of a plant out of place, right, is a weed. So they appear in all sorts of unwanted places and affect the beauty of our landscape. And they can also be trip hazards, you know, allergy issues with some, all of that. So weeds is number one. Number two is invertebrates, which includes the insects, arthropods, and other critters like mites, sow bugs, and pill bugs. So some of these are not pests, but still they're considered pests by some people. Snails, slugs, all of those, they're all invertebrates and in the number 2 category. Number 3 is vertebrates, which includes the birds, snakes, fish, and rodents and other mammals, which can be pests certainly, and people. And number 4 is pathogens. Pathogens are agents that cause pathos or suffering. And pathogens can include microorganisms like fungi, bacteria, viruses. We're all too familiar with viruses right now, right? That's why we're wearing those masks and all that. Not getting into that. But nematodes, phytoplasmas, different kinds of microorganisms. And there's also non-living agents that can cause pathos or suffering. So I'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, so these are the 4 major categories. And the next question is it necessary to actually see the pest to decide whether it's causing a problem? Sometimes no, you don't have to see it, right? But by some of the symptoms and signs they leave on a plant of our interest, right? So there can be holes or chewed parts of leaves and other plant parts. It can affect the stem or the trunk. Sometimes you can see holes with ooze coming out, sometimes no ooze. Sometimes a branch just dies back. All of that can happen. Flowers and fruit can be affected. All of that can happen. So all of those are signs of insect or other pest feeding. Now, a little quiz, pop quiz. So I'm getting at pest identification, but I thought I'll just throw out these. So by just looking at it, can you tell what caused it? Any guesses? Good guess. Anyone else? Wait till you see the answers. Anyone else from this side? Sometimes I like to divide the room into 2 and play a game, but we don't have time for that today. So anyone? Freeze, that's good. Okay, let's see the answers. One is, on the left is dieback, caused by canker, which is a fungus, which is caused by fungus. And the other one is de-icing salt scorch. So they look pretty similar, right? But they're not the same. Okay, so one more pop quiz question. What about these? They look pretty similar again, don't they? And again, they're 2 very different causes. Anyone like to take a guess for this? Okay, no worries. Drought damage. The bush just dried up because it was because there was a drought. And on the right, it's scale insect damage. See that? So sometimes you don't have to see the pest, and sometimes it helps, right, to know. What about these? I know a lot of you have seen this. What are those structures called? Galls. Very good. Very good. Okay, so what about the cause for the galls? Are they this? Do you think they are the same? But I'm asking you these quiz questions, so I'm sure you know they're not the same, right? So yeah, they're not the same. So the one on the left is caused by a scale insect, and the one on the right are a bunch of fungal galls. Okay, and final one more quiz question. What about this? You see the white stippling on the leaves. I don't know if I'm using the pointer, not working. Okay. Any guesses on this? So who said mites? Well done. Okay, one of them is mites, definitely. So the one on the left is indeed mite damage. And the one on the right, anyone who can say that will get a prize. Did I know? I didn't hear. Sorry? Leaf hopper. Good guess, but no, not the right answer. The correct answer is lace bugs. Anyone seen lace bugs? Right? Those teeny tiny insects. So you see the white stippling looks very similar, but they're not the same. So with that, those few quiz questions, just to get you into the mood of pest damage and pest identification, I'll move on. It's not always a pest, okay? So there's a lot of other things that can cause damage that looks very similar to pest damage. Okay, abiotic stress signs. Some abiotic stress signs look very similar to pest damage, and these can include changes in the leaf color. They can cause leaf wilting, abnormal growth. Sometimes stem or trunk dieback can occur. Flowers or fruit can change color and have abnormal growth, distortion, all of that can occur. And it's important to distinguish between biotic and abiotic factors. So abiotic, of course, refers to the non-living, right? And this can include physical or environmental factors, mechanical damage. It can be in Gary's presentation in the beginning, the first presentation, he talked about spousal abuse. Remember the strimmer damage to trees. So mechanical damage, chemical damage, of course, herbicide injury, a common example. And then there's biotic, all of the living things that we talked about. Okay, so there's one character of biotic disorders that's very helpful to identify. Very often they leave physical evidence of their presence, like insects leave behind caskins because they mold, right? They leave behind frass or poop. I always say poop is an entomologist's friend because it tells a story, right? And if it's a pathogen, it can leave spores or other structures like the mushroom head. And biotic injury often spreads progressively because it's a living thing. It spreads on the plant. And sometimes, actually many times, disease causing microorganisms and pests, they restrict to a certain species of plant. Some are host specific, right? And a good example is citrus greening, which is caused by a bacterium. And it's spread by the Asian citrus psyllid. Just chose that as an example. However, yes, and these are some of the signs of, again, of biotic agents. Like birds and rodents, they make unique nests, okay? So that's helpful in identifying them. Insects have characteristic feeding damage, and we'll see a lot more later. Fecal materials are very distinctive sometimes. Caterpillar poop is very distinctive. It's different from bat guano, okay? Weeds have, their own characteristic flowers, flower heads, their branching patterns, leaf orientation, that helps in their identification. Pathogens have unique patterns of growth too. However, when it comes to abiotic disorders, we'll see that a lot of species are affected in the landscape. Take this picture, for example. In this landscape, a lot of plants are affected, right? There's palms that are drying up, the grass is drying up, the tree is drying up, the bushes, everything is affected by drought. And there's no progressive development of symptoms, as in the case of a living a biotic agent. And but the thing is that abiotic factors often predispose, make the plants more susceptible to biotic factors, right? So in that way, they are related. Okay, so now I'm coming to pest identification, which is a favorite topic of mine. And again, I'll use insects as examples. And we know that all stages of an insect pest may not look the same. They may or may not look the same, be found in the same environment, and feed on the same food, right? And a good example is the case of completely metamorphosing insects like butterflies and beetles. How many of you have had an entomology class? Oh, only a few. I love this. So I get to talk about all this. Okay. So completely metamorphosing insects have these different stages. That look entirely different. And there are some which are incompletely metamorphosing, and a grasshopper is a good example of that. And you'll see their stages they look very similar, right? They're smaller, the young ones are smaller, don't have wings and cannot reproduce, but they look similar to the adult. So understanding these differences is very helpful in identifying the pest and also the kind of damage it causes. And knowing where the pest, the particular specimen was found, on which kind of plant, under what kind of situation, that is also very helpful. Okay, so again, continuing about pest identification, this is another thing I like to emphasize a lot, because I get a lot of samples for ID, which look like that. There's some unidentifiable black mass in a plastic bag. I get that all the time. That's why I put together this slide. Handle samples carefully. Even if it's to say, whether it's to send off to an expert or if it's for you yourself to get back to your office and have a closer look. If you have a microscope, I want to have a better look under a microscope. For all of those purposes, handling samples carefully is always important. So plastic bags are good, but don't leave it in the plastic bag, shove it into a pocket or stick it on the dashboard of your truck, right? And then there it lays forgotten and the contents turn into a black mass, not helpful. So the better thing to do would be, yes, put it in a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag or a clear plastic bag, collect as much of the plant as possible. If possible, collect a few insects or whatever critter was causing the damage, if possible. Sometimes you may not know it, but unknowingly you've collected eggs, you've collected cast skins, all of that is helpful. You might have collected poop, best, that's really good. And as much of the plant as possible, put the plastic bag in a cardboard box or metal box or something that's not crushable, that does not get crushed in transport. And then also include as much information as possible on a piece of paper, location, what plant it was found on, things like that. It's all very, very helpful for pest ID. And another thing is use good resources. I just wanted to share this particular resource that we put together at the Arizona Pest Management Center, but it's for the entire desert Southwest. So this book is available free of cost online. You can download chapter by chapter or read it online. It's called the Handbook on Pests of Community Environments in the Desert Southwest, United States. So, or you can even buy the book. If you want to buy a print copy, just let me know. I can send you a link where to buy it. Okay. So it has a lot of pictures. I love pictures. So I think pictures speak 1,000 words, right? So that's why I put in a lot of pictures in it. That helps to identify. And some of these critters are not pests. So that's what I've tried to say in the book. Okay. Another thing is pictures. Another thing I wanted to mention is pictures. And who doesn't have a smartphone these days? Is there anyone who does not have a smartphone? Right? No one. Everyone has smartphones. We take lots of pictures, and 90% of those pictures are useless. We'll never even look at them again, probably. But when it comes to taking pictures of pests, and especially for ID purposes, a few tips I wanted to share, because again, I get a lot of pictures for ID. Hey Shaku, can you identify this? What is this? So that's why I wanted to share this. So a few tips. First, hold your phone with both hands. One hand photo taking sometimes doesn't work that well. And get as many pictures as possible. Try to get pictures of the damage also, if possible, not just the insect. And don't zoom too much on your phone. Sometimes we tend to think that zooming helps. It doesn't. I'll tell you why. So look at this picture. Okay. That's why I said zoom in with your hands and feet. Move closer to the subject rather than zooming on your phone. And here's a photo taken without zooming. Okay. It's taken at a good distance, but it's clear. It's taken with the camera steady. You can see much of the detail on the insect, its characters, you know, the number of spots. You can even see some of the hairs on the plant stem, which is great. It's a good picture, right? And the reason why I like it is, I'll tell you. It can be enlarged by the receiver. You send it off to someone via email or a text attachment. It can be enlarged by the receiver without losing much of the detail. Okay. However, if you take a picture of the same insect, zooming out on your phone, you take out your phone, you zoom, use your fingers to zoom out and take a picture. It's good. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's already lost some of the clarity, right? You see that? And when you send it off to someone and they zoom it again on their computer, on their phone, you see how it looks. It looks really blurry. It's lost a lot of the detail. Now, in this case, it's a lady beetle, right? You know, it's a lady beetle. Much of the details are already there. It's all right. But when you're looking at really tiny insects and you really need to see some of those characters, it's very helpful if you don't zoom. Okay, so those are the tips I wanted to share about taking pictures of insects. Okay, and with that, another tip, add something for scale. And I get this again all the time. I get pictures of insects and sometimes there'll be, you know, wings wet, wings stuck to their bodies or legs broken, a lot of pictures like that. And when it comes to beetles especially, you know, beetles are the most diverse among the insects. There are 400,000 species of beetles in the world. So beetles are most diverse, and it's crazy how many of them are there and how similar some of them look. So if it's that picture, it's a good picture, I would say. It's a good picture. You can see many of the characters, but there's nothing for scale. So how do I tell? So that's why I say add something for scale. So in these pictures, you can see, and they range from the size of a pencil point to the size of your palm. They can be anywhere between that. So it's always helpful if you can include something for scale. Not only in the case of beetles, any insect picture you take, it's always helpful if you can, like it can be a pencil point, it can be a fingernail, right? Or your finger, or a key, or a pen, or anything like that. It's very helpful. So always add something for scale, okay? And the next aspect I want to cover is, how do insects feed? You know, this is important. And they don't all feed in the same way, okay? And their mouth parts are remarkably adapted to help them to feed on their particular food of their choice. And here are a few types of insect mouth parts I've listed out here. There's chewing and sucking, the two common ones. Chewing and biting type of mouth parts. And I'll show examples also. And then the piercing and sucking mouth parts. Those two are the most important when it comes to plant damage. Okay, the other two, not so much. lapping type, siphoning types, just two other types which are really cool. I'll show you pictures. Okay, so here are the chewing and biting mouthparts. And they are found in caterpillars that do a lot of plant damage, grasshoppers, wasps, crickets, and beetles. Beetles have chewing mouthparts too. So those are the chewing mouthparts, and then the piercing and sucking mouthparts, which are found in bugs and some flies, dipterans, think mosquitoes, right? They have piercing and sucking mouthparts too. So why is it important to know the difference between these? I'll tell you in a second. But before that, here are the examples of lapping type found in honeybees and the siphoning type found in moths and butterflies. The siphoning type is especially cool because they can be rolled into a coil and stored under the insect's head when it's not feeding. And when it's ready to feed, it uncurls and it feeds. So I just wanted to show you pictures of that. These are not problematic when it comes to plant damage, but it's good to know. But an insect mouthparts determine what kind of injury it causes to the plant, right? And that's why it's important. So they are important diagnostic tools. And biting and chewing mouthparts, they take out chunks of plant tissue. So that results in a different set of symptoms. Whereas piercing and sucking mouthparts, they pierce into the plant and draw out fluids, right? So they result in, but they leave the structure intact. So they result in a different set of symptoms. So that's why it is helpful to know. And these differences have implications in how you diagnose and manage the problem, right? And that's why I wanted to mention that. And before I move off the general entomology topic, I just wanted to say there's so many types of insects, right? The insects are the most diverse type of animals on the planet. And I've just listed a few here on the slide, but the point I wanted to make here is not all insects are bugs. We refer to all insects as bugs, but they're not all bugs. There's only one group which are the true bugs, the Hemiptera. And the others are all very, very unique. They all have their own groups, and they're just really, really cool. Okay, so just a few examples here. And insect names. So it's all right if you're confused. It's very common to be confused. So just an example here. You see these two critters on the slide. Okay, they look very similar, don't they? But they're not the same. So the one on the left is a bug. It's a true bug. It's a hemipteran. Whereas the one on the right is a beetle. So they look very similar, but they're not the same. Another example here. In this case, the one on the left is a beetle. The one on the right is a bug. Okay. So it's all right if you're confused. Don't worry. Okay, so just with that introduction to insect, mentioned a little bit about metamorphosis, how they pass through different life stages, how they feed, and why pest identification is so important. With that basic overview, let's look at a few landscape pests in the urban environment. Okay, in the desert Southwest. So we like to group them. Thank you. We like to group them into, foliage feeders. It's helpful to group them like that. Foliage feeders, root feeders, stem and trunk feeders. You can classify them however you like. But here are some foliage feeders that are common on urban plants, landscape plants and trees in the desert landscape. So there's these butterflies. Among butterflies and moths, there's the Gulf fritillary caterpillars, bagworms, another very interesting group of pests. There's a Palo Verde webworm, tent caterpillars. I'm sure many of you have come across these as you work in the landscape, right? Leaf miners, another very interesting group of pests. So they call leaf miners because they mine between the two surfaces of a leaf. So you can imagine how tiny they are, right? Teeny tiny. And their entire life, the egg is laid on the leaf. The caterpillar emerges and mines inside the leaf, and it pupates also inside the mine. And when it's ready to emerge, it breaks open the mine and it emerges. So leaf miners can be lepidopterans or dipterans. So there's both kinds of leaf miners. Okay, so how many of you have seen leaf mines? Common, oh yeah, they're common on many landscape plants and trees. And you can see that, spiraling, some of them are spiraling, some of them are winding. The mines have those patterns. It's very interesting to see. Another group of foliage feeders common on many of our desert plants, the agave weevil. You can see how it has, how the symptoms on the leaves, the hard leaves of the agaves are affected, and the weevils and their grubs actually feed inside the heart of the agave. Okay, very common pests in landscape, in the desert landscape. And the other group is the cactus longhorn beetle, right? They feed on cactus pads. Okay. And another group of foliage feeders are thrips. Now, again, how many of you have seen thrips? Oh, good. So thrips are actually, a lot of people have not seen thrips. They don't know what thrips are. They're teeny tiny insects, and they have a very unique kind of mouth parts. They're a combination of chewing and biting and sucking. So they make, scrapes on the plant surface, and with one half of their mouth parts, and with the other half, they suck the sap that exudes. So very interesting kind of mouth part. And the other unique thing about thrips is that it's one thrips and many thrips. Okay, so it's the same term for one and many thrips. So that's about thrips, and thrips are very common on chili peppers. I just mentioned chili peppers because they're common on them, but they can be found on many other plants. Okay, and another group of foliage feeders are the sap-sucking insects, aphids. Aphids are very, very common on trees as well as many other landscape plants. And I'm sure everyone has seen aphids at some point, right? Those tiny pear-shaped insects that sometimes are so numerous that they can cover the entire plant. And there's different kinds of aphids. Of course, there are different species. In this particular picture on the bottom, I wanted you to pay attention because some of those aphids are larger than others. You see that? So pay attention to that. I'll talk more about that later. Okay. But yeah, aphids in general are sap. They all suck sap and they exude sweet, sticky substance called honeydew, right? And which attracts ants. And then that's another different interesting story. But I'm not going to that now. Okay, more sap-sucking insects, leaf hoppers, and lace bugs. Remember, I showed you a picture of lace bug damage, and white flies. All of these are sap-sucking insects. Sap-sucking insects, of course, they suck plant sap and result in a set of symptoms. It can be, chlorosis. The plants lose their green color, they wilt and they dry up, all of that. But they can also transmit diseases. Pathogens, they also can transmit that. So that's the problem with sap-sucking insects. More foliage feeders here. Cochineal scale. Scale insects are also sap-sucking. So they're not like the other sap-sucking insects. They don't move about a lot, but they can cause significant damage. They stay in one place, very, very numerous. Sometimes they can cover entire sections of the bark and they suck sap. And that's how they damage. And the cochineal scale is also a scale insect. I'm sure many of you have seen that cochineal scale. And one identifying character is to crush it. And it exudes the red color. So that's cochineal scale. And scales are also very common on mesquites, mesquite scale. Okay. Another group of foliage feeders here, the giant mesquite bugs. So has anyone seen them on mesquites? They're common on mesquites, and they look scary. They're actually the largest hemipteran. Yep, they're large. They're very large, about up to 2 inches in length. They are adult, and they look scary. And the young ones also look different from the adult. Okay, they're red and they have that very characteristic coloration. And they look scary. People are tempted to spray for them, but they're actually harmless. They believe to have co-evolved with the mesquites. So the mesquites provide food. Of course, they serve as food for the bugs. And the bugs feeding stimulates new growth on the mesquites. So they have evolved together, and they're actually pretty harmless. And another group of feeders, these are stem and trunk borers. Okay, and there's just a few examples of those. That's a flat-headed borer, the round-headed borer. There's so many other different kinds of borers. And here's a different group, root feeders. So there's white grubs, which are very, very common in desert landscapes. They feed on the roots of a number of different plants and turf, actually. So white grubs are very common in turf. The palo verde beetle is a pest of palo verdes and many other desert trees. It's found in the root zone. The grubs are found in the root zone. And ground pearls are also another example of root feeders. They're found in the root zone. Okay, so okay, another group of pests which are actually foliage feeders are mites. You know, some of you mentioned mite. Who mentioned mite damage when I showed you that picture? Mite damage, yeah, mite damage. So the feeding by mites are not insects. Okay, so that's one thing to remember. And feeding by mites results in a number of different symptoms, and many times they cause this deformation in plant parts. And in this case, it's in an agave, and on the right, it's in a cactus, a Pancha cactus. See that deformation that's caused by mite feeding. All right. So common non-insect pests here. And there are a few nuisance pests that I wanted to mention, not just those which damage plants, but also are a nuisance to people as we work in the landscapes. And ants are an important group. And harvester ants are a very common species in desert landscapes. They're called harvester ants because they harvest, right? They harvest seeds from grasses and other weeds in the landscape. And if you look closely at this picture, you can see a tuft of hairs on the head of that ant. You see that? That's a beard. It uses the beard to help carry the grains to its nest. And harvester ants build the very characteristic nests in the landscape too. It's easy to identify. So something to look out. They can give nasty bites. So something to look out for. And okay, so I think that was the last picture of the pests. Now, it is a very quick overview of the different kinds of pests we see. Now coming to the question, how do we manage them, right? So it's about management, integrated pest management that I was going to talk about. So here I want to introduce the concept of integrated pest management, or IPM. And is there anyone who has not heard of IPM? Okay, good. Everyone knows about IPM, which is great. So it's this holistic method of managing pests with the least risk to people, property, and the environment. And IPM is also economical in the long run. And it's safe and sustainable. And that's why we try to promote IPM in all situations. So IPM has had its origin in an agricultural situation. But now IPM is used in any kind of situation for urban, structural landscapes and agriculture situations. Okay, so the important one of the important characters of IPM is that it integrates a number of different pest management methods, and some of them are listed here. There's natural, there's physical, mechanical, cultural, biological, chemical, genetic, and regulatory. And in every situation, we don't have to use all of these methods in every situation, but just the knowledge that they are there, they are available to us. That's what is important. And we can use it based on our decision, make a wise decision to use them. Okay, so I'll cover a little bit about each of these methods. Okay, so first is cultural. in a pest management situation. So cultural methods are methods that are part of the normal cultural activities when we grow plants. And they're not very exciting, okay? They're not dramatic in their effect, and they don't result in quick knockdown of pests, but they serve to reduce the pest numbers, right? And make the environment unfavorable for pests. That's what cultural methods do. And these are things that we should do anyway when we grow plants. Plant properly, for example, seek resistant or tolerant plants, avoid susceptible plants, things like that. And rotate, crop rotation or plant rotation, that's another part of cultural control. So all of these are classified, all of these steps are classified under cultural control. There's mechanical or physical methods, which include the use of barriers or screens, traps, things like that, things that mechanically or physically stop pests or stop them from accessing the plants. Okay, so all of these, such as use of mulch, use of sanitation, all of that are included under mechanical methods. Then there's biological control, which is the use of living creatures. They can be insects, they can be other biological agents against pests. That's biological control. And you'll see, I'll show you more pictures later. Bugs get bugs too. And they play a very important role in keeping pests under control. And much of this is actually happening in the landscape and we don't know it. But there are things that we can do to encourage biological control agents. All right. And then there's chemical control, which is a very, very big, very, very important tool in IPM. A lot of people think that IPM is anti-pesticides. We cannot use pesticides in IPM, but that's not true. Chemical pesticides are actually a very important tool in an IPM program. It's just that they are used wisely and not all the time. So there are a few points that we keep in mind when we use chemical control in an IPM program, and those I have listed here. So there's thresholds, timing of sprays, selection of chemicals, and keep in mind the development of resistance, because that's a very big concern, mode of action, and selective chemistry. Okay, so what are thresholds? So often you hear the word thresholds when we talk about pest management, but thresholds is actually just a number. A threshold is a number which helps us to take action. Okay, so a threshold, and it can be different in different situations. So a threshold can be based on aesthetics. So when you're talking about a valuable landscape, which contains a lot of exotic plants, the threshold that we decide is different than when it's a food plant, right? A crop plant. So it's different. So based on the number of pests that are acceptable to us can be. So in this case, the gentleman is wearing a bee suit, a suit of bees. So his threshold is naturally very, very high, right? And it may not be the same in a different situation. So it also depends on the comfort level, what is acceptable to a person, right? So the next point is chemical selection. So we know a lot of different chemicals are available in the market, and some of them are traditional broad spectrum pesticides, which have a long residue, and they can quickly bring down pest populations, but they also affect non-targets, right? And they may have bad effects, adverse effects on beneficial organisms, some of the biological control organisms. And they are also usually higher in toxicity and basically they're broad spectrum, so they affect multiple pests, non-targets. So selection of chemicals is another important thing to keep in mind while using chemical control. And of course, there's concerns with pesticide dependence. So there's pest resistance, development of resistance, and also these terms, bioaccumulation and biomagnification. We've learned this in school, right? Some of these terms might be familiar. And the thing is, some of these phenomena are not even fully understood, even with our advanced technology. So that's another very important concern with using chemical pesticides. The development of resistance. It's something that is many times overlooked when the same chemical is used repeatedly. What is resistance? So it's the phenomena that occurs when a population of insects builds up tolerance to a specific chemical or a group of chemicals with the same mode of action. And this graphic actually shows it shows very interestingly how the resistance is built. So in the first picture, you see one resistant insect, right? The red one. But as the application progresses, the same chemical is used repeatedly. You see the number of the red insects is increased, and the white ones, which are not resistant, they actually decrease. So it's an interesting graphic. It's useful to explain the phenomenon of resistance. And there's different types of resistance by which insects are able to resist the effects of the chemical pesticides. And it can be metabolic, it can be altered target site, it can be resistance to penetration, which means they develop a thicker cuticle by which the chemical cannot penetrate their cuticle, or it can be behavioral. They can learn to avoid the insecticide or the chemical totally. So insects develop resistance by different mechanisms. And there's also cross resistance that's possible. That is really scary. And a good example of that is the green peach aphid, which over the years, it has developed resistance to a number of different groups of pesticides, and all through different mechanisms. So that is really scary, right, that situation. So that's another thing to keep in mind while using chemical pesticides. And even though the threat of developing insects developing resistance is very high, we can do a lot to prevent the development of resistance. And these steps that I've listed here, they're all things which we should be doing anyway. They all make perfect sense. And for example, select insecticides and management tools which preserve natural enemies, use non-chemical techniques. I'm not going to read out all the list, but this will be available to you after the conference, so you can refer to it. But just want to say that we can do things as part of our normal cultural activities to delay the development of resistance. And when insecticides don't work, there are a number of reasons for that. And what applicators usually state is that the pests are resistant or it's a weak pesticide. But in truth, there are a number of other factors that are at play when an insecticide doesn't work. So it could be that an incorrect trait was used. It could be that there's a poor distribution of the product while the application was done. It could be that the product was bound by absorption in the soil. It did not reach the target site. The product could have been hydrolyzed, and so a number of other reasons, right? So when insecticides don't work, there's a number of other factors at play. And there are a number of other options for pesticides too. And some of you may have used these, but just know that they're out there, soft pesticides. Okay, they have short residual, and some of them are selective, and they're safe for beneficial organisms, and they can be used along with traditional pesticides to delay the development of resistance. And some of these are physical toxins to which insects cannot develop resistance. That's also possible. And here are some options for that. There are desiccants, and a common example is DE or diatomaceous earth. And desiccants are actually a fine, they need to be in the fine free flowing state. They cannot be wetted for them to be effective. And some desiccants actually are mixed with other insecticides to make them more effective. And another group is soaps, insecticidal soaps, which are actually potassium salts or fatty acids. There's also very effective products for some groups of insects. Oils, horticultural oils are also another important group of soft pesticides, which against which insects don't develop resistance. And microbials are another option. Of course, they're not applicable in all situations. And another product is kaolin clay, which is used in a lot of fruit trees actually as a feeding deterrent. So the kaolin clay coats the plant parts and fruits, and that prevents feeding by insects. So it's a physical barrier. And then there are botanicals. There are a number of botanical products that are actually quite effective. Some of them, a lot of research has been done on some of them. And well, there are others which are not proven by research. But some of these products like neem, pyrethrum, rotenone, there's a lot of research that has been done, and these are effective products. And then there are insect growth regulators or IGRs, which affect the growth and development of insects. And they act in a number of different ways. They can keep the insects in their juvenile stage, not allow them to turn into adults. And at that stage, they're more vulnerable. So they're more vulnerable to other methods of control. So IGRs are very effective when incorporated into an IPM program. And IGRs can also affect the fertility and embryonic development of insects. Okay, so that's another group of soft pesticides. And now coming to how to apply IPM, how to develop an IPM plan for your landscape. Okay, so as I said earlier, IPM evolved or originated in an ag situation. And in an ag situation or an agricultural situation, regular sampling is done, right? If any of you have worked at any time in an ag situation, like I have worked in cotton. So we go out and do scouting for cotton. So regular sampling is done for pest populations, and economic injury levels are determined. So economic, like we discussed earlier, thresholds. So we determine a specific level of pest populations at which some action has to be taken to prevent the pest population from developing into an economic level, from causing economic damage. And these are different for each crop and each pest. But in a landscape situation, we cannot develop an economic threshold level, right? It's different. These are aesthetic crops. They're grown for, not for food purposes. They're mostly grown for aesthetic purpose or beauty. It looks good. It has to look good, right? The landscape. So, and many of the landscape plants like trees, they're perennial. They cannot be replaced easily, right? And many of them are maintained on a high edge of stress. They're extremely stressed. So in these situations, in a landscape situation, it's different from an ag situation. And it's always easier to spray. The tendency is to spray than to monitor, right? So in this, when you try to apply IPM concepts to a landscape situation, it has to be modified slightly. And that's why I wanted to share this concept of key plants and key pests. And in a landscape, not all plants are equally susceptible to pests, right? We know this. And similarly, all pests are not equally damaging. So at any given time in a landscape, you'll find both. And when you try to apply IPM concepts to a landscape, it's good to map the landscape and identify these key pests and the key plants. And that will help you to target pesticide applications. And then there are a number of approaches that you can take when you're trying to manage pests in a landscape situation. And tolerance or doing nothing is an option. You don't necessarily have to do something for every pest that you see, right? And You can also, provide tender loving care to plants to help them recover. That is an option. And if there are large pest populations, then yes, you have to intervene and do something about it. And just a few more things to think about actually. Where is the location of the pest and the stage of the pest? These are things that we need to consider before applying a treatment. And yeah, like I said earlier, pests of plants don't always occur one at a time. At any given time, there'll be a number of different pests that affect the same plant. So any kind of treatment that we apply can actually affect a number of different pests. That's the multiple target principle. I'm going really fast here because I know it's almost time. And finally, creating a turf or a landscape IPM plan or an IPM plan for your trees it's a good idea. And it's not a single document, a one-time document. It's something that is dynamic and it changes along with your landscape. And I wanted to finish with these few beneficial insects and to leave you with that thought that not all insects are bad. And there are some that are really good. Here are some examples: the lady beetle and the hoverfly, some parasitoid wasps. And this is the mummified aphis, the aphid picture. I remember I told you some of them are bigger. So they're parasitized aphids. And when you see parasitized aphids, it's a good thing. And they actually, that means that biological control is at work. And so you don't have to spray. And here are some more beneficial insects: praying mantises, paper wasps, and green lacewings. And a few things to think about. Are they pests or not? So these are digger bees. These are actually not pests, but many people think they are because they make holes in the ground. They're actually ground-dwelling bees. They're great pollinators. So, and same with leaf cutter bees. A lot of people think that they are pests because they make those little circular cuts on the leaves, but they're actually not. They're excellent pollinators. So, the final few slides here, mosquitoes. Nobody thinks about mosquitoes when you're talking about landscapes, but they're a huge presence, right? Especially in the summer. And, there can be thousands from a bottle cap. That's enough for them to breed. So when you see situations like this in the landscape, try to avoid it, tip and toss. And yeah, that was my final slide. I know I rushed through a lot of the information. It was a lot of information, but I'm happy to take questions, and I also have my contact information here. So if you ever need to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. I'll be happy to address your questions. So thank you very much. Thank you.